here you have the T3 pattern in two places on this chart. We'll start with number 1, and before we even do that, we'll look to see that we have the trend line and the tricks line coming in close together in both of these places, but we'll start with the one on the left first. You have the trend, because this is a New York Stock Exchange stock, so we're going to be looking at the blue line on this chart, and the tricks are coming in close. We'll go down here and look at the CCI, since that is going to be our first warning, and we are looking for a drop below the 100 line, and we have that. It actually tried to do it a little bit here earlier in the first part of May, and then as a little moment of strength went back up again. Number 2 is the second step, and that is a pushing away of the tricks and the trend lines, where the trend is going up, which is opposite, if you remember, to the candlesticks, which are going to go down, and that's what we want for the T3. And then we have the third signal, which is an actual cross of the tricks line. We had the cross of the pink and the teal, which is our earliest EMA signals. And then over here, a few days later, you had the cross of the 15 and the 9. So this is where I was saying this gives you a heads up a little earlier and puts you into the trade a little earlier than if you waited for a cross of the 15 and the 9. But the 15 and the 9 at the same time is your real baselines, and it helps you, by looking at those, helps you to cut out some of the whipsaws, and we're going to see that on some charts as we move along. Then the fourth signal is the ADX, and you can see that we have a weakening of the strength line, and you have the minus DI gaining strength here at the same time that you are moving from being overbought, and that you have the lines pushing away from each other and the tricks actually crossing. So in this case, you have all 4 of the signals that a trade is setting up. While the ADX line, the minus DI, is starting to head up, we have the plus DI that is weakening and heading down. Ultimately, we do have the cross of the EMAs, and that's kind of the last signal. It happens much later than everything else, and if you waited until you had an EMA cross, you would have missed a good part of the trade. If we look at the second pattern here, again we have the trend and the tricks coming in close together. Then we have the drop down, which is a leading indicator of the CCI dropping below the 100 line. This is a signal that it's dropping from being overbought and heading toward being oversold. The second is the push away of the trend and the tricks. They're pushing away. Then we have the cross of the early EMA, the pink and the teal lines here, the cross. And then ultimately we have the cross of the main tricks line. You can see that the number 5, the stock, is starting to drop. And number 6, we have the plus DI in, the minus DI in control, and the plus DI losing strength. It's dropped and crossed below the minus DI, and the minus DI has really taken control. So as we look at the charts that follow this, we will follow these steps where you will see the trend in the trend Q coming in close. You will see the CCI as a first signal, then you'll have the spread of the tricks and the trin, then you'll have the crossover of the tricks lines, and you'll have the plus DI and the minus DI swapping places as the minus DI starts gaining strength and the stock price starts to drop. Again, here we'll kind of analyze another chart so that you could be able to see and begin to recognize the steps. You have number one, you have the trend lines, or the tricks lines and the trend lines coming in close together. You have the CCI dropping. You have the push away, which is really the entry to the position. Then you have the cross of the tricks lines. You have the plus DI weakening, and you have the minus DI gaining strength. I've done these kind of out of order, but then you have the tricks lines crossing, then you finally have the main tricks line crossing. You have the price candlesticks dropping, and ultimately then at the end of the trade you have a weakening of the downtrend. And we will cover exit signals a little bit later on into the different slides, but this is just giving you a clue that the exit, this T3 has come to an end, and you can also see that the minus DI is starting to weaken and the plus DI is starting to gain strength, as well as the strength line losing its energy and zip in the downtrend, where here it was much stronger as we were actually in this T3 trade. Okay, I've taken all the marks off of the chart so that your eye can begin to see the pattern. This is Kimberly-Clark. You can see that this appears to be a T3 that has happened here, where you have the tricks and the trend coming in very close together. Here is the second one. Now this is a little bit wider, but again you can see that the tricks line has climbed up toward the trend, and then you have the other signals that we were looking for on the earliest trade. You have a drop here of the CCI, you have a weakening of the plus DI, a gaining strength of the minus DI, you have the push away, you have the cross down, and indeed the price of the stock dropped. On this second pattern, the more recent trade, you have the lines coming in close together, as I mentioned. You have the push away. You had an earlier CCI drop. You had a little burst up here where it tested again, and you'll see that this often happens on the CCI. There will be this little burst of energy that says, you know, I'm not quite ready to go down yet. Let me try one more time. It will pop up toward the 100 line, maybe even cross over just a little bit, and then we'll drop back down again. And you see that you have a strengthening here of the minus DI and a weakening of the plus DI. All signals that this downtrend is taking place or going to take place. Here we have CTRP. I have marked 2 blue circles which shows viable T3 patterns, and the red one shows one that happened a little late. And I'm going to show you the difference here. That you have the trend line and the tricks line coming in close together. You have the CCI. It dropped here, came back up, and then dropped again. And that is forming this little area here of kind of indecision. You have finally a little bit of a push away. You have the cross down of the short-term tricks, and then finally the cross of the longer term. you can see that the weakening of the plus DI and the strengthening of the minus DI, but it was not until this period right in here around March 16th that finally the minus DI took control and popped up over the plus DI line and over the strength line. And then you have this major drop that took place. You had a cross where it all went back up again and the lines were coming in, and then you had a push away of the Trix line, and you had a drop of the CCI. But it all happened, I wrote the word late here, but what I'm saying is you have this push away of the line, and then you have the cross down of the CCI line, and actually the minus DI never took control or gained any strength. And so when you have a CCI that happens after the push away, it's going to give a signal that is not going to amount to the kind of play that you want. You want the CCI to happen first. You want the weakness in the plus DI and the strength in the minus DI to happen before the lines push away. And as you can see, you never really did have a full crossover of the lines. They kissed here, and it waited until there was another peak in the CCI and a for real cross down here that happened prior to the pushing away. It was like the CCI dropped in this period after the little downward movement here happened. And so it was a late signal. And so if you're looking at a chart and you see that the CCI is crossed, but it's already right in the middle of a drop, and you see that there is a push away of the trend and the Trix, it's like it's that movement itself that is causing the stock to move from being overbought rather than being overbought being the actual signal that is telling you that a T3 is setting up.